Good afternoon. On behalf of Gurney and myself, I want to wish each and every one of you a happy and a kosher and a sweet and a meaningful and inspiring, joyous Passover experience. On behalf of Chabad at Chestnut Hill, I offer our gratitude to you for being such dear friends, supporters, and standing with us throughout the year. Tomorrow night we will all sit down to the Seder. And the children will ask the 4 questions. In some homes, one child, the youngest one, asks it. But in our home, every single one of the children asks it. In fact, the rabbis tell us what happens if there's no children to ask a father, then the husband or wife ask it to each other. But we always ask the 4 questions. Why do we ask the 4 questions? Because asking questions means that you're free. When you're free, you're able to think, to ask, and to search. But it's interesting, because this year, Passover, is different than all other years. Because the Seder will be on Saturday night, which is a very rare occurrence. In fact, the next time it will happen will be 20 years from now. And in fact, the rabbis tell us something interesting. Whenever Passover occurs on a Saturday night, Tisha B'Av, the saddest day in the Jewish year, will also occur on a Saturday night. And even more so, the rabbis say, that's why we have an egg on our Seder table. And on Tisha B'Av, the saddest day before we go to begin the fast, we eat an egg. But what's the connection between Tisha B'Av, which is a sad day, and Passover, which is a day of celebration, a day of experiencing freedom, a day where we recline and we act like kings? The other question is that in the 4 questions that we all ask, we ask the question about why we dip twice on this night and we don't dip on the other nights. But we never answer the question, why do we dip twice? And what is the message there? And the rabbis tell us something remarkable, that the dipping of 2 times really is referring to the first 2 dippings in the Jewish history. The first one was when the brothers sold Joseph into slavery. They took his coat and they dipped it into blood. The second time is when the Jewish people slaughtered the Paschal sacrifice and took the hyssop and dipped it into the blood and put it and painted it onto their doorpost that God should protect them. What's the message here? You see, the first time when they dipped the blood, it came out of disunity. It came because they didn't love each other, because the brothers hated Joseph. What did it lead to? It led to exile. The second time, the Jewish people brought the Paschal sacrifice in unity. In fact, they had to do it families together. It was about unity. And what did it bring? It brought redemption. And that's what we remember on the night of Passover, when we're celebrating freedom. We must remember the power of the unity of the Jewish people and the power when we're not united. And at a time like this, when we're in such pain, reeling still from October 7th, it behooves us, as we witness disagreements again in Israel, to remember this important message of the dipping twice, the 2 first dippings in history, and what they each led to. Yes, in the Manishtana we say, why is this night different than all other nights? And of course, the answer is because there's still hostages sitting in Gaza for over 500 days that won't be able to celebrate Passover as they should. You know, I always wondered, when you think about it, you read these stories about people who commemorated Passover in the concentration camps, in the Gulag, in the hardest of things. And I said, how could it be? Because really, Passover is about freedom, about liberation. But if you're in a concentration camp or in the Gulag, how could you celebrate? But today, I got the answer from Agam Berger. We all know Agam Berger, one of the most famous hostages who was released. And when she was being released after 493 days, she had a sign that said, I chose a way of faith, and that's why I went out. And Agam Berger wrote an op-ed in today's Wall Street Journal. And in the op-ed, she writes how when the Hamas captors took her and she watched people being killed around her. She made a choice that she was going to choose to live, and she was going to choose what to say, and she kept on just reciting Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O the famous words in Judaism, hear, O Israel, there's only but one God. And she said throughout her captivity, they tried to force her to convert to Islam and forced her to wear a hijab, but she never gave up her faith. And she said because she realized that she wasn't the first heroic Jew to be in captivity. And she mentioned some of the famous and heroic Jews who were in captivity. And she said something so powerful. They could take away your freedom physically, but they can never take away your spirit. Which is why even sometimes in captivity, you celebrate. And she says, her and her fellow scout, Liri Albag, they made Passover together in a small room with no natural light. They did it, whatever they could, to set the holiday mood. They cleaned and adorned the room with tables and napkins and other small decorations, made from scraps of paper. And as a surprise, Liri wrote a makeshift Haggadah, the text that recounts the story of our ancestry leaving Egypt. And throughout captivity, she was moved from tunnel to apartments, and in some had limited access to television and radio. But on Passover, they heard that people had set up a table on the Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. And Liri was able to listen to her mother voice on the airways. We cried, she says, and then sat down to eat our own bread of affliction made out of cornmeal. As she realized that even in the darkness, you could celebrate being free, because they could take away everything they want, but they can't take away your freedom. And tomorrow night when we sit down at the Seder table, we should celebrate the freedom of spirit of the Jewish people. We should celebrate the Liri Albags and the Agam Burgers. I recommend you read her op-ed in the journal. And we should remember the power of the unity. We sit together with our families and celebrate this beautiful day. I'll finish with one last story. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichever was called a defender of the Jewish people. One year before Passover, he called some people and he said, I want you to get me narcotics and illegal things that are not allowed to be gotten in Russia. And they said, Rabbi, for the right price, we could convince someone and pay them to get us. And then he calls some Jewish people and he says, I want you to get me bread. And it was the night of Passover. And they said, Rabbi, all the Jews burned all the bread and sold it. They don't have bread anymore. He says, I'll pay a lot of money. They say, Rabbi, but we can't find any bread. And then Yitzchak Berdichever looked up at heaven and he says, Almighty God, your children, there's no police forcing them not to have bread. There's no one telling them they can't. But yet, they faithfully celebrate your holidays and they faithfully adhere to what you tell them. Look how special they are. That's the story of Pesach. Millions of Jews around the world will sit around the Seder table. And Elijah the prophet will come. And the rabbis tell us that one of the reasons Elijah the prophet comes is because when he spoke against the Jewish people in the famous story with the false prophets, God said, you will witness in every home the way they celebrate Passover. Let us celebrate in unity. Let us speak words that uplift, not words that disparage. Let us speak words that unite and not divide. Let us celebrate our freedom, our hope for the hostages, for Israel, for humanity. Let us remember who we are, and that by sharing and giving, we are truly free and able to celebrate. Chag Sameach and Shabbat Shalom.